Welcome back to the Donkey Vote podcast with Francis.
Tobias.
And George. These interviews will be focusing on the past careers of politicians before they entered parliament.
With a strong intention to our audience that anything is achievable no matter what you studied in university or college.
If you like this sort of content, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Also, we are on YouTube and Spotify, so make sure you follow us on those platforms.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well to keep updated with the latest episodes and reels that we release.
Enjoy
the interview.
And today we are joined by one of the members for the Western Victorian region, Sarah Mansfield. Sarah, thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
Just for our audience out there who may not know an entire lot about yourself, could you give us a little brief description just before we get into the questions?
Yeah, so I'm currently in Geelong. This is where I live with my family, and I'm, as you said, one of the members for Western Victoria. I'm the Greens' first regional member of state parliament, which is quite exciting. So I was the first one anywhere in the regions elected in 2022. Prior to that, I was a councillor at the City of Greater Geelong for 5 years, and I was actually the first Greens councillor on that council, and also worked as a GP. So my background's really in healthcare, and I have a real interest in health policy and public health.
And that's quite interesting as well that you were the first regional Greens MP in Victoria. I
Yeah.
know the Greens have done recently very, very well in that sort of Geelong region, as you know, we've seen in terms of, that higher vote share in and around that
Yeah.
Geelong area. So it's quite interesting to see that you were the first one to be elected in the Western Victorian region.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and I think it shows that, yeah, as you said, there's been over, across the region, and especially in parts of the region like Geelong, Surf Coast, and Ballarat, the Greens vote has been going up, and I think that reflects that, a lot of what we're fighting for is what people are looking for.
And also even in the Bendigo region as well, I know Castlemaine and that sort of area has got a very strong Greens vote. So
Yeah,
it's really all over the
absolutely.
regions. And it's
Yeah,
quite interesting as well because sorry to interrupt you there, Sarah, but
yeah,
a lot of other when you think of regions, I know a lot of people I've talked about this with with a lot of different sort of people who aren't as into politics as myself. But a lot of people find it very strange. A lot of regional areas are starting to move towards that green sort of movement and that sort of more left-wing sort of movement because a lot of people think the regions are full of a lot of country people who vote National Party or whatever. So it's quite interesting to see that specifically in Victoria, and there is to some similar extent in New South Wales, but probably not to the same extent as we're seeing in Victoria currently.
Yeah, and there's probably a few things driving that. One is probably some demographic change. So there's, younger people moving to the regions, and that was sort of accelerated during COVID. I think also, some of the issues that are affecting people in the regions have meant that, they're sort of looking for an alternative to, the big parties. So, regional communities are on the forefront of, the effects of climate change. They're out there seeing it. They're also, surrounded by a lot more of the natural environment. So they sort of see what happens there. And, a lot of the things that are causing challenges for people, like the cost of housing, rental affordability and availability, cost of living, all of those things are really starting to hit for regional communities.
That is very true, and a lot of people do talk a lot about the housing crisis being just suburban based, but it is still crazy. There's still crazy house price and cost of living pressures all in the regions as well, and I guess that's not really talked about as much, in the wider BDS sphere.
Yeah, and I mean, we might want to get into this more, but housing, the impact of unaffordable housing, it is being felt everywhere, but the consequences are a bit different in a regional context. And you look at somewhere like, say, the Surf Coast of Victoria, there's rental availability barely gets above 0%. Like sometimes it's been down at 0%.
Re-
And it maybe hovers around 1%. So there's hardly any rentals available. And if you're someone who, for maybe you've lived there all your life and you need to move house for some reason, the person who owns it sells the house or something, you might have school connections there, family connections. Suddenly you can't find anywhere to live. You have to move away from all of that. That has a much bigger consequence than maybe, I don't know, having to move to the next suburb. Like if you have to move to a completely different town, that changes things for you, especially when there's such poor transport between
yeah,
places and, all the other effects of being in a regional area. And then you look at things like small businesses and other, hospitality, health services, they can't get staff. So it has all, because they can't find housing, has all of these flow on impacts for those communities.
it really, really does. And I think we'll touch on a little bit more about that in some of
Yeah.
our future questions for sure. So I think we'll get straight into the questions now. So my first question to you, Sarah, is how was your high school and university life? And do you have any memorable moments?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I went to high school in Canberra. I didn't grow up in Victoria. I was born in Sydney, and then we moved around quite a bit when I was growing up. I so parents took job opportunities where they came up, and that meant moving around. So we started in Sydney, moved to Wollongong, which is where I started school, and then moved to Canberra, where I finished school. Um, and I was a real nerd. I loved school. I loved learning. I participated in all the nerdiest extracurricular activities. I was doing
You in the math
debating
club?
or not maths. Maths wasn't quite my thing. I did it because I had to, but I was more of a humanities sort of
Ah,
person, actually. Um, but yeah, loved, and art really. So, if there was an art club or a musical or just anything that the school was doing, I loved getting involved in that sort of stuff. Um, so yeah, I mean, I have overall pretty fond memories of school in general. Um, I think, you know, there were probably a few really key moments, but this is one that I shared in my first speech to Parliament. That was, it's something that's always stayed with me. Was I, as part of all of these nerdy kind of, interests, I ended up somehow getting to have a morning tea with a member of federal parliament.
ah.
I can't remember what it was about. And I think there might have been a few students from different schools, but there weren't many of us, and we were all there, and we got to, I was really excited about it. I had always been interested in kind of politics in general, but I didn't have a strong, I didn't have a strong sense of who I'd align with and all that sort of thing. And I was, just excited to meet someone who's you think is really important, making really important decisions. And I haven't named who that person is.
Is that for
um,
a specific reason or?
oh, I just think it's yeah, I don't think I need to, but the anyway, during the conversation, uh, we had the opportunity to ask a question, and I said, if there's anything you could change, what would it be? And that person said that MP said, nothing. And I just was so deflated by that. I just thought, so this is in a period, it would have been in the 90s, which um, probably most of the listeners won't necessarily won't necessarily be too familiar with, but
They probably weren't
John
even
Howard
alive
was,
at that point.
no, that's no, probably weren't born, but John Howard was the Prime Minister. I'm like in my, early to, or, maybe mid-teens. Um, there was a lot of really bad stuff going on. He was very conservative. There were just some terrible things going on. And I just found that answer so disappointing. And even if you look beyond that, surely you want to change something, right? Why would you get into politics if you think it's all just everything's just fine? So I found that really frustrating. And it probably was one of the moments that really kind of, yeah, it hung with me, it frustrated me. And um it's just one of those things that always comes back to me, and you think, why don't you, there's too much to do. We can't just do nothing. And there are people in there who think that, yeah, doing nothing is fine.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's best you keep this MP to the, nameless. I guess it
Yeah, yeah,
adds
people
to
can get
the
that way.
people can guess. Was this in the ACT, Sarah, when you were in
Uh,
Canberra?
well, it was in federal parliament, so yeah, yeah, it's a
Okay, I mean,
federal
there's not
member of
many
parliament.
federal Canberran MPs, so I'm
No,
guessing
so it
someone
wasn't.
out.
No, 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 so it wasn't. It was sorry. So it was at Parliament House. So
Oh,
they weren't necessarily from Canberra. Yeah, yeah. It
oh,
was just
okay,
that they
okay.
were happened to be in Parliament House. So
Hmm.
one of the quirks of going to school in Canberra is that you get to go to Parliament House a lot.
Yeah,
It's a popular excursion venue for
I
school.
think at the end, when you're 18, you've probably been there more times than you've been to like you've probably been there more times than you've been to like the zoo or something in
Yeah,
terms of
exactly.
like yeah. Because I
Exactly.
know
Yeah,
my cousin went to ANU in Canberra for a while, and then
yeah.
she said she would just casually just go to Parliament House and go
Yeah.
to the cafe and just see Pauline Hanson sitting there.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that was sort of the context. But no, so what I can actually say it was not an a like if we're excluding it's a little clue, but the no, it was a member from another state. But
okay.
yeah.
That's quite interesting though that that was your specific moment that kind of hung with you during your high
I,
school years and do you think that also really pushed you towards eventually becoming a politician and eventually running for parliament in the back of your mind maybe or
I think it definitely had an impact. And even if it was just about helping me figure out what my politics was, like where did I align with? And it definitely wasn't with an attitude of everything's fine. And at that point, um, so, later in high school, like just as I was sort of finishing high school, um, in my last year of high school, actually, I was able to vote for the first time because I just turned 18. I'm pretty sure it was around that time anyway. And um, yeah, I think you know, so I sort of had to figure out where I stood on a whole lot of things. Where did I lean? What was yeah, what was my politics? What did I believe in? And that was probably one of the moments that helped shape that. Another thing that happened was there was you'll hear this referred to often when issues around asylum seeker policy come up. And so you hear about children overboard or the Tampa affair. That happened during my last year of high school. And I just found that one of the most it was horrible. It was just I just found the way that asylum seekers were being used as a kind of political tool during an election time, in such a cynical way. And both major parties didn't do, like for me, just were so wrong in the way that they were talking about this. Um, yeah, I felt so let down by that. That also helped to really shape, where I sat. And for me, even at that time, the Greens were the only ones taking a humanitarian stance on this, a principled stance that I believed in, that I could support. Um, and so, yeah, that was another kind of key moment in shaping things. And I guess overall, yeah, I through those experiences, I definitely became more, I guess, interested in politics and how much politics and policy decisions shape the world that we live in. So I don't know that I ever wanted to be part of it. Like at that point, it wasn't really on my radar, but I definitely became more interested in, how do you, in finding ways I could make a difference to the world around me and make things better, um, and more just.
hmm, yeah and did this political interest kind of peak as well during university life as well when you went to university and actually I didn't ask what university did you go
Yeah.
to and I'm guessing you studied medicine there um
Yeah, so I studied medicine. So yeah, I did medicine as an undergraduate. I actually did that at the University of Melbourne, so that's how I ended up in Victoria.
oh
Um,
okay
ACT didn't, I think it didn't have a medical school at that time. I think they're about to open one or something, but it was going to be postgraduate. So yeah, I had a choice of going to Newcastle or Melbourne, and I chose Melbourne. And yeah, that I sort of didn't have any real connection to Victoria, so it was a bit of a wild ride. You know, moved straight into a bit of a sort of dodgy rental, and day one had to go out and find myself some transport, so bought a bike and started looking for a job. And it was yeah, I found uni quite, it was great, but I found it hard because I was um if I wasn't studying, I was working. And it wasn't necessarily the fun uni life that some people, I don't know, some people sort of either were having or people associate with uni. Go to the pub and drink with your friends. I literally just didn't have time or money to do that. And so I found it a pretty hard slog. But that said, I feel really lucky to have had the opportunity to do that. And because I love learning, it was still, you know,
Just the nerd in you.
I still enjoyed it. Yeah, yeah. The nerd in me was very satisfied with the whole experience. But yeah, um, so that was a 6-year course, and then sort of have been in Victoria ever since.
So if things were different, you could have ended up in Newcastle. If you
Yeah,
chose
I
to.
know. It's like those sort of
Well,
strange sliding moments.
was there any sort of decision between Melbourne and Newcastle at that point? I mean, of course, Melbourne's a better city. I'm just gonna put that out there. But
Yeah, I think that was the appeal, really. Like it's,
okay.
there were probably a few factors, but that one, yeah, I think I liked the idea of living in Melbourne. And that said, Newcastle would probably be in a great city, and I've ended up in Geelong, which is a kind of comparable place to
Newcastle, yeah.
Newcastle. Yeah,
And I mean, a lot of people from your situation as well, Sarah, who, move interstate from universities do have that sort of struggling period where, if they aren't receiving as much support from home, they have to get their own jobs and,
yeah,
support themselves in university. And it is quite a challenging period, as you have described from your scenario and from your experience.
yeah. It was really hard. I had to move a lot because each rental had some, I don't know. There's a story behind everyone, but it wasn't great. But the thing is, I kind of look at, you know, it was hard, but it was possible, right? Like
Mm.
between working, bit of youth allowance, whatever, it was possible to get by. I look at like the situation for young people now, and I just, you know, I think it's just so much harder. It's just become so much tougher to rent. Um, Everything costs just so much more. I don't like, I feel like I barely kind of, scrape through a lot of the time. But it was possible. Whereas now I think for some people, I don't know if that would have been a choice, like what I was able to do. I don't know if I'd be able to do that now. Um, which, I
Which is
don't know if
quite
that's
sad.
been the experience of your friends, but that's kind of what I see. I go, it was hard then, but it's so much harder now.
Yeah, I think from my experience, a lot of my friends, still go to university here in Melbourne. Like I grew up here, I grew up in Point Cook in the western
Yeah,
suburbs. So a lot of my friends still live at home. I mean, I'm only a first year
yeah,
student, so things could change.
yeah,
What I've seen, a lot of people, they're not doing as bad as what I've seen from other sort of people in probably in your similar situation, Sarah, because not many people from my school, moved interstate to go to university. So,
yeah, yeah,
but I will. I'm not going to say it's not that, you know, there's, other students from other states who have come to Melbourne or Melbourne students have gone interstate and they're probably experiencing something very similar where,
yeah,
not receiving as
yeah,
much support as they need and, they're
yeah.
struggling to get by.
Yeah, yeah. And like it might mean that it's harder for people to move out of home at all, like even within your own city. Like it becomes less of an option for you, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just in terms of housing and everything in general. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think we'll move on to our second question for you, Sarah. So, this is from George. So, prior to your parliamentary career, you worked as a GP within the Greater Geelong region for quite a considerable
Yep.
amount of time. What sort of work did you conduct in your GP career, and how do you think, if at all, your medical career prepared you for your political career?
Yeah, it's a good question. So uh I worked in a few different general practices, just like your ordinary GP
Also,
clinic.
so Sarah, what made you actually go to Geelong specifically as a GP?
Yes. Yeah, so I wasn't actually a GP before I moved to Geelong. So I spent my first few years as a doctor working in Melbourne. So I worked at the Austin and the Northern hospitals and did a bit of locum work, sort of doing, basically casual kind of shifts in different country areas. Worked in Bendigo for a little while. And then I started training in emergency medicine initially. I thought that's what I wanted to do. And I really enjoyed the work. But I, yeah, after a while, you kind of, there's lots of things about that system where you get a bit frustrated. You think a
It's
lot of
very
these people
stressful.
could, well, also a lot of people didn't have to be there if they'd had better prevention in the first place. Um, but general practice had never really been on the radar. And I was starting to, yeah, again, sort of get a bit agitated about, what are the system issues that are causing, people to be here in the first place. There were lots of cost barriers for people to access care, all sorts of things. So I was really lucky. I think I was about 3 years in and I got a scholarship to go to London to do a master's in health policy planning and financing at London School of Economics and London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. That was incredible. I feel so lucky to have, had that opportunity. And it was, so that was really looking at, yes, health system issues. And it was while I was there, I actually met a few GPs who were working in London, and I started thinking about the importance of, community-based medicine and prevention, and kind of fell in love with the idea of being a GP. It suddenly felt like my
Mm.
calling. So when I got back from London, I changed to general practice basically. And came to Geelong, came straight back to Geelong. The reason I came to Geelong was my now husband was he lived here. So I'd met him doing we were both involved in the junior doctor arm of the Australian Medical Association, which I got involved in my intern year. Again, I guess just being a bit frustrated with some system issues and seeing it as a potential avenue to do some advocacy. And so, we met doing that sort of work on committees, going to meetings. So
Just doing
life
some
is
boring
sort of
things.
doing some boring things that I really enjoy doing. So so that's why I came to Geelong. And then I ended up in general practice because of, I'd had sort of that path. And then I worked in a few different general practice settings. I did a little bit of aged care, but a lot of just general, a bit of everything sort of general practice.
Sort of like your
Um,
local doctor type thing.
local, you just your local GP. I also like medicine in general, but general practice in particular. There's so many opportunities to do other interesting things. So I also did a little bit of part-time work at a medical journal for a while as a medical editor. So reviewing, medical papers and that sort of thing, which was, I really enjoyed that. Get to do a little bit of writing as well. And at the university, just helping out with some of their teaching program for the medical students. So that was great. And then I also did a stint for a couple of years, just, a day or two a week at a service in Melbourne for people experiencing homelessness, where, I think that was a really pivotal sort of moment for me around getting more politically active. Um, it it was great. I really enjoyed that work, but it was one where you just sort of see very, very clearly. I mean, you see it all the time as a GP, but very clearly in that environment, all the policy failures being lived by people day to day. Something that should be really simple to treat became really complicated because someone didn't have a house. Just didn't have shelter, basically. So, and people died as a result of that, and it's hard to explain how much that like that affects you. Like people were dying of things they shouldn't have died of. they were often very young, and it was a result of, society just like not supporting those people.
Hmm. And I think that's quite similar even to today. You see a lot of homeless people all across the nation, struggling in terms of, getting basic medical care and that sort of thing. And it's
Yep.
quite frustrating. And we do live in Australia where, a lot of people think, that sort of thing doesn't really happen. And, I'm half Filipino, and in the Philippines you do see a lot of that sort of thing. And it's quite saddening to see that sort of stuff even happening here with, the people who really need that support sometimes not really receiving it.
Yeah, and it's like, as you said, like in a country where overall we have so much wealth, how is that acceptable? That we have people who, um, just uh, uh, are just not, their needs are just not prioritized, and we somehow see it as acceptable for people to have to live on the streets, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of homelessness. Like, that's the most
Mm.
visible face of it, but there are way more people who are living in cars, or couch surfing, or you know barely hanging on to their rental, and are in very insecure environments. um
Yeah, it's it's really challenging time, and I guess with the whole housing crisis and cost of living crisis, this issue is being really exacerbated in terms of the severity and how many people
yeah.
are being forced into the streets.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of young people as well, like very
Mm.
young people. It's a huge and growing issue.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully, in terms of good governance, that sort of issue can change. And with the federal budget coming out on Tuesday, there was some cost of living relief there. So hopefully, you could always have hope, but hopefully down the line, those sort of issues can be resolved.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it is these are things that are choices for
Mm.
governments. And um, I guess I'm in there because I don't think that they're always making the
The
right
right
choices.
choices.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we'll move on to our third question for you, Sarah. So, this talks a little bit more about your councillor career. So, you served
Yep.
on the the City of Geelong Greater Council from 2017 until your election to State Parliament in 2022. We've had a lot of previous interviewees who have also served on council previously. But from your experience, how did your career as a councillor prepare you for your own state parliamentary career? And for you, what are some of the key differences that you found in terms of becoming a state MP and being a councillor?
Yeah. I think it prepared me really well, actually. um, I think becoming a counsellor was a really huge learning curve initially. Um, but once you've been in there for a year or so, you start to get the hang of it. I think you can always
Hmm.
get better, but
There's always room for
you know,
improvement.
there's always room for improvement. But I think being an elected representative, there's nothing that quite prepares you for many parts of it. There's sort of no course you could do. There's nothing that really, it's
Not
hard
even
to
a politics degree can kind of help you out with it.
know. Like, there's the theory, but then there's the practice. And some of the things that I think, um just even simple things, like there are a whole lot of just formalities and processes and procedures and that sort of thing. And while they're not exactly the same across local government and parliament, there's some similarities. And what I found was, once I got to state parliament, even though I didn't necessarily know all the technicalities, I knew there would be a process, and kind of had a sense of how you'd find that out, and an understanding of those sort of structures. Um, and so that, and an understanding of what, of governance, and how you make decisions, having been in a position where you have to make difficult decisions, which is, again, and how to kind of work through those things, how to in making decisions, a lot of that role is engaging with the community and different stakeholders and finding out their thoughts and feelings, because obviously at the end of the day, you've got to make a decision on behalf of the community and people, and do your best to make the right decision. And so all of those skills around consultation and how you do that, you develop through being a counsellor. And the other thing that I found really valuable is just negotiating with people who maybe have very different views to you. So where we are in the upper house as Greens in Victoria, we are often in a position where we're essentially in balance of power, which because neither Labor nor the Liberals have a majority, so they've got to rely on the crossbench, and we're the biggest bloc on the crossbench. So yeah, we're often in a position where we're negotiating, and when you're on a council, you are one of, like in my case, I was one of 11 councillors, and if you have something you want to get done, or they have something they want to get done,
They'll
you
talk
need a
to you.
majority of councillors to support it. And so you've got to figure out how to work with people who are often, aren't always aligned with you. Sometimes it's obvious, but sometimes it's really not. And that skill is something that I think, you develop through practice. And I've found that quite helpful with the transition to state parliament.
And I think it's quite interesting as well that, a lot of the times, everyone really kind of assumes like the Greens to be more, to be working more with the Labour Party. But so there's some circumstances where the Liberals and the Greens will, have a little block together and they'll work together. And I guess it's not as common as it's not commonly seen, but it does sometimes happen. And it does really go back to your point where, you sometimes have to work with people who necessarily don't have the same views as you. And you come to find different sorts of working around, and coming to, I guess, the mediation period where, you come from two different sides, but you come to some sort of middle ground where you can work between both sides of the issue.
Yeah, and there have been examples of that, this parliament where we've maybe our motivations for wanting a particular outcome might be different, but we've been able to agree for different reasons on the same sort of on a particular course of action. So, for example, there've been a few inquiries that have got up because of and it's been the coalition and us supporting it, because for different reasons we feel that inquiry is really important. It might be a bit of negotiation around the terms of reference for that inquiry, like what are the actual things it's going to look into. And then there've been some other things around integrity as well in Parliament, where we've been able to sort of, unite on and agree on, integrity measures. So, I think it's, we're there to get outcomes really, and I think if you're there to just pick a side and or if all you're focused on is the fight, and then you don't have goals that you're trying to, if there's not something you're trying to achieve, then you're not gonna get very far if all you want to do is go in there and just fight with other people. Doesn't mean it doesn't mean you don't have values, doesn't mean you don't have principles. There are things we won't compromise on, and that's really important, but we also want to get things done.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, you are dealing with people's lives, and sometimes it is forgotten that the decisions they make in Parliament reflect people's lives entirely. And
Absolutely.
you can't really be in there just always arguing sometimes for your own perspective if that nothing's going to ever get done, and other political parties aren't going to listen to you. So sometimes it's about mediating and coming to a moderation agreement where you still have your internal views, but you mediate and try and work for a better outcome for, in this case, all Victorians.
That's the thing. You want to get good outcomes for people, really.
Yeah.
That's what we're there for. Yeah.
Yeah. My next question for you, Sarah, this is from Tobias. What are some of the key issues for you in the Western Victorian region for the next 2 years of your parliamentary term? I I think I can probably guess what you're going to say here. But probably cost of living and
Yeah.
housing.
Yeah, I mean they're two that we've touched on already, and I think we talked about housing earlier and how important that is to the regions, and yeah, I'm going to keep talking about that in particular. What more can be done for renters? How can we free up more rental properties? How can we make it more affordable for people? There are things the government can do. It's about choices and priorities. We need more public housing as well. So, they're things that we'll be really pushing for.
Actually, just to touch
Um,
on public housing a little bit, Sarah. Is there
yeah,
much public housing? I know there would be quite a number in Geelong, but there's not as much as
yeah,
I would think in, the South Surf Coast area, like around the
yeah,
Torquays and maybe outer suburban
yeah,
Geelong. I think Geelong's probably got a still pretty dense sort of housing area, or is that starting
yeah,
to drift away now with that's
yeah.
with those housing getting knocked down with, big apartments and that sort of thing being built up as we're seeing, in the city.
Yeah, so there's public housing all across regional Victoria.
Oh.
It's, obvious, it might not be as I guess identifiable as say the towers in Melbourne,
Mm,
but there is plenty of public housing around. There is, however, there hasn't been significant government investment in
mm,
new public housing for decades. And there's a real shift away from what we would consider genuinely public housing. So that's housing that the government owns, runs, manages. Um, a lot of that is being outsourced to, the not-for-profit sector, or some of that land is actually just being sold off to the private sector to provide what they call affordable housing, whatever that means. So we're really passionate about ensuring that there is, the government plays a significant role in providing housing for people. It's, really important part. It affects everyone when you do that. If firstly, it has an effect on the whole housing market, so it makes it more affordable for everyone, because if the government becomes a big provider of housing, just takes the pressure off a lot of other parts of the market. Um, and it also, there are a lot of people where, government funded housing is the best option for them. And, we've touched on this before about the consequences of that. You just have more and more people who are living with housing insecurity or homelessness.
mm. Exactly, exactly. And we can't let that get to that sort of extent. And are there any other specific issues that you're focused on? I know many of the people in the
Yeah,
surf coast, climate change would be another big issue that would be
yeah.
talked
So
about a lot.
climate change is huge, and it's something that affects the whole region, really. Like regional areas are on the forefront of, when we have a disaster like a fire or a flood, which, Western Victorians have experienced plenty of. Um, every year they seem to be facing another, catastrophic event, at least one. So they're living that, and, genuinely, like, they're anxious about what's coming and what they're experiencing, and how you know, what we're doing to slow this down, and or not doing to slow it down, and what we're doing to kind of prepare communities, because we know there's more of this to come. So, that's a big focus. Seismic blasting is something we've been quite involved with. So this is a technology that's used to explore for oil and gas in our oceans. Basically where you get a blast of air that's shot from the surface of the water down to the bottom. Big ship drags along this device that does it. And it's almost like an explosion going off under the water. It's incredibly loud. It's not some gentle sonar thing, which is what it's sort of made out to be. It's a huge blast of air. And this is happening, you know, every 10 seconds, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it can go on for months. And it's to map out these areas for oil and gas. And they can do the same area again and again, because there's lots of different companies looking for the same stuff, and they don't share information with each other. And there's a lot of, that while there's often not great research that's been done in these areas, what we have got is evidence that it decimates a whole lot of different marine life, kills zooplankton, a lot of different types of shellfish. It injures them, um, creates problems for whales. And so there are a lot of coastal communities that are really upset about this, because there's heaps of plans for oil and gas exploration across in the waters in, off Western Victoria. And so we don't want oil and gas exploration because it's making the climate crisis worse. Like that's something we're really passionate about stopping. But the method used to find it is also causing damage to the environment. So that's a huge issue for us as well.
Hmm. And that, as we were saying before, climate change is a massive issue, especially for
Yeah,
the Surf Coast region, with, being right on next to the sea, decaying
yep,
of, as you were saying, like barrier reefs, and that whole, beaches, being taken over by water and the natural environment
yeah,
taking over, uh, you know, land near the
yeah,
sea. It's quite destructive. And something pinnacle like the Great Ocean Road in the future, if climate change isn't fixed, could be
yeah,
could be destroyed or could be even damaged due to those pressures by the environment.
yeah. Absolutely. And like the irony is that there's, gas exploration happening right near the 12 Apostles.
Mm,
The state government's allowed that to happen, and there's more coming. They're going to expand that. And like that just blows my mind. It's like we've got this reminder right there to like it's, you know, spectacular visual reminder of everything there is, every reason we should be out there trying to protect our environment. And what do? We look for more oil and gas, and threaten all of that. So yeah, that's a really big one, and um, it's probably no surprise to anyone that that's one of the big things we'll be focusing on.
mm. For sure, for sure. We'll move on to our next question for you, Sarah. So I don't know if you've taken a lot of thought into this, but who would you
Hmm.
say would be your political role model or idol?
This is a good question because there's probably a few, but I'll narrow it down.
You can name
Um,
them all if you want. I
yeah,
mean,
well, I think like it's very hard to look past for me as a Green, hard to look past the role of Bob Brown as like, one of the founders of the Greens. And
the green movement
um,
entirely in the whole world, actually.
yeah, and you look at um, just his ability to turn community movements into uh, incredible outcomes for, the environment, for people, social justice. He just, he's just a wonderful leader and someone who I think drew many people into the Greens. And was probably one of the key, was kind of the leader at the time. When I was talking about before, during that first election I ever voted in, I have memories of him just being kind of a standout in terms of moral leadership in that during that time. And so, yeah, hard for me to look past his role in it. There's a couple of great recent films about him and his life for people who might not know much about him. Um, that I'd really encourage people to have a look at because it's incredible. He's still being arrested for defending forests in Tasmania. He's just unbelievable. Um, and so he's certainly a hero. He started out as a doctor as well, which is
Hmm.
interesting. So
Quite
I
ironic
kind
there.
of, yeah, I kind of, I think, and possibly drawn to the Green movement for reasons that I can really identify with. Um, and then there's the person who kind of got me first more actively involved in the Greens. So Richard Di Natale he's another former leader of the federal Greens. He used to have an office here in Geelong when he was a senator. And so I think I just got back from, London was really thinking about health policy and um, public health and how, the things in our environment have such a big impact on our health and well-being. And I looked at Parliament and I could see that there was this person there who's everything he was saying made a lot of sense. And so I reached out to his office and said, look, I don't know what I can do. I've got other work I need to do, but I'd love to be part of this in some way. And so I ended up doing some volunteer work for Richard's office. Richard was also a GP.
Ah,
So we had a lot of aligned interests there. And yeah, I think that was sort of the entry point. I started did a sort of, I guess you'd call it an internship or volunteer sort of project with the Office on Health Policy. He was the health spokesperson at that time, but not long into that,
You
into
became.
the time I was in that, volunteering in that office, he became the leader, and it just meant that I met a whole bunch of amazing people who I love what all of these, I just felt at home. These people are my people. They're out there fighting for change. I still never saw myself as
An
running for
MP at that
parliament.
point.
No, I was very much focused on I'd love to be involved in policy development or the behind the scenes sort of, like um, helping to support people like Richard, basically.
Hmm.
And so it took a bit more coaxing to get me to even think about running as MP. But I think, and there are so many others who I just admire so much. Um, but those two would be kind of key people who I think, one kind of just being someone who showed me where my politics probably lay in the first place, and then with Bob Brown, and then with Richard, just being someone I want to come and help out. I want to
Hmm.
volunteer.
And I guess with Richard as well, his help in, developing your policy work and that sort of thing, and volunteering for him kind of really got you more involved in the Greens movement. Because at that point, were you more an adamant Greens voter? Were you like a party member at that point, or were you
No,
just,
I wasn't a
willing to?
party member. I wasn't. No, no. Like I was a voter. Um, I but that was it. That was the extent of it, really. And I like followed it. I knew that's where my values lay, but it seemed like this sort of other world, and I don't know. I don't know what I thought it might be like, but I was, yeah, it was. Like as soon as I started to get involved, that was the start of all of this. So,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah. And talking about getting involved, that comes across to our next question. So, what made you run in the 2022 Victorian state election for the Greens, and what made you join the Greens in general? And I'm guessing,
yeah,
that moment working for and volunteering for Richard
yeah,
kind of made you join the Greens in that sense.
yeah, absolutely. I think, as I said, I felt like, these were people fighting for the things that I really believed in and wanted to see changed. I'd looked at, through the different work I'd done, I'd always sort of found myself trying to find opportunities to, I don't know how or why it happened, but I'd try and be an advocate in different ways or change things. And then, I suddenly felt like I'd found you know, a pathway to really fight for those things. And my values aligned so closely that, I joined the Greens. As I said, met some incredible people. We've had a new senator sworn in just this week,
Steph Hodgins
Senator
May.
Hodgins May. Yeah,
Yes.
so she was working for Richard at that time. So I met her in Richard's office, and she'd be another person I'd put up there as a real hero. She's just unbelievable, and um, she was one of the people who said, "Would you think about running as a candidate for?" And at that point, it was the 2016 federal election. They just asked if I'd run as the candidate for Corio, which, this electorate that I'm in now, knowing that it was unlikely I was going to win it, but that's not always the goal of running an election. A lot of the time it's about, um, helping to build the vote over
Yep.
time,
Hmm.
build up support, make sure our senators get re-elected. So yeah, that was the first time I ever ran for anything. But if it hadn't been for Steph kind of encouraging me and tapping me on the shoulder initially, then I had, chats with it. It took a few more people to kind of get me over the line, but she's been an incredible backer and supporter. So I met her through that. Then I think after I ran in that was great experience running as a candidate. Enjoyed it. You get to be I think, I was really reluctant to do that, be a candidate. But what I realized is a couple of things. One, it gives you an opportunity to advocate for the things you really care about. Like it's a platform to do that. The other thing it did was it meant you kind of get opportunities to meet all these people in your community that you otherwise wouldn't or didn't know about. And so I felt so much more just connected to the place that I lived in after that experience. That said, then the following year, City of Greater Geelong was having an election. So in 2017, they had an election out of cycle because it was a council that had been sacked in administration for a year. So
We don't want to
they
talk
were
about
having
that.
fresh election. No, well, yeah. So I wasn't on there at that point, but they had a fresh election, and again, someone said, "Would you think about running for local government?" I went, "No way, no." I ran as a candidate, that was great, but I'm done. Interested in the policy work, and then former leader of the Victorian Greens, Greg Barber, sort of sat me down and gave me a really inspiring talk about all the amazing public health work that local governments do and the difference that you can make. And after that, I was like, yeah, I'm running. I want to be a councillor. This is how I'm going to change the world, I love this. And so, then was elected to council. That was the first time. And I really enjoyed being a councillor. I mean, this could go on forever about that. But I think when it got to 2022, I'd sort of reached a point where I was just getting more frustrated with, I felt like we were making some progress on some things at council level, but we were hitting brick walls when it came to what we needed the state to do. And I saw a lot of issues that we couldn't really influence as a state, as a council, whether it's things like climate, a lot of housing issues, things like public transport, health, access to healthcare, and they were affecting not just Geelong, but the whole region. And so I think I just reached a point where I was like, I want to see more action on all of these things. So decided to give it a crack at the state level.
And the rest is history from there.
The rest is history, yeah.
That's why you're in that building right there talking to me. So
That's right. Yeah.
So really that whole 2016 Corio campaign kind of really kick-started your whole political career, kind of building up that sort
Yeah,
of base.
absolutely.
And as you said, Corio is still part of your electorate, West Victoria. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of the people that you work with in Corio are still the same people that you're going to be working with currently now as a member for the Western Victoria region.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe down the line as well, we could see some Greens lower house candidates, in federal or state parliament in the Geelong region. Who knows at this point?
That's
It's
the
trending that
dream.
way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we will, actually. Like, I'm very confident that we will. So
yeah.
it's been growing. Yeah, just starting to see, even over my time, there's more councillors in the regions. There's more that vote's been growing. So I don't think it will be long before we see some regional seats turn green.
Mm, mm, mm. And I think now we can now move on to our final question for you, Sarah.
Yep.
So, finally, what's one piece of advice you'd give to students in 2024, especially those who have started university or high school this year, and maybe even primary school for your young
Yeah.
child who started this year in prep?
I think that it's really important to not accept people who say we don't need
Same
to do
thing.
anything. We don't need to do, there's nothing wrong. And don't let them get off with that. Like, sometimes the people, you'll hear, older people tell you, oh, they love when younger people do think, oh, I've got so much hope for the future generations, and it's all this potential that's deferred to the future. It's like, don't let them off the hook. The people who are in positions of power should be doing something, and young people need to hold them accountable. That's one sort of side of it. The other is you have so much agency as young people to make change right at this point in your life. So you don't have to wait, So when they say, oh, I've got hope for the future, all these great people coming through and they're going to change everything in the future. No, young people are changing things now, and they can, and you should believe in that. And don't be afraid to do that. You don't have to wait. Like, you can get involved and change things right now. But also those people who are waiting for you to, waiting for the next generation for all the change to come through. Tell them, hang on a second, what are you doing?
You can be the
You
change.
know, you can be the change as well. So everyone can be the change at whatever stage that they're at, but you should be as well. Like if you think there's something wrong, then the time to do something about it is now. It's not, you don't need to do a degree to recognize that something's wrong and change something. There will be opportunities in your life right now to make a difference. And there's all sorts of ways you can do that. But yeah, don't underestimate your own agency and ability to make change.
Yeah, and I think in general, from what we've seen in terms of politics nowadays, there's a lot of people, who sit on the sidelines, talk a big game, don't really do much, and just expect other
Yeah.
people to, do it for them. And I guess in that sense, if you really do have that sort of issue or something that you in your local area that isn't being recognized or isn't being pushed for from your MPs, there's nothing stopping you from running for parliament and pushing that sort of issue because if you're lucky, you can get elected.
Yeah.
And if you run a good, strong campaign and you don't get elected, that sort of change can happen, and that can better off your whole society, better off your hometown, your neighboring suburbs, and your local community.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I guess it's really all about just putting one foot in front of the other and really pushing for that change. Because sometimes if you're talking about the change and you want something to happen and there's no one else really, who's willing to put themselves out there and run for parliament and do that sort of thing, it's up to you in a sense to,
Yeah.
do it.
And it doesn't always have to be run for parliament. It might be start
Yeah.
a community campaign about, I don't know, maybe you want to save a local tree or something like that. But
Something small
you
like
can,
that can
whatever it
be a
is,
huge
whatever it
difference.
is that you're passionate about, you can, like, all of these things, like people in parliament, people in elected positions, often the change is something that kind of lags the community push, it's the community that drives the change actually. And that person who's a representative is just a kind of like, they're kind of the conduit of all of
Yeah,
that energy and that, what's coming from the community in the first place, but it's the community that drives it. So yeah, there are all sorts of, that's what I mean about there's all sorts of ways you can create change. You don't necessarily need to run for parliament to do that. And sometimes you can affect a lot more change and be a lot more powerful outside of it. So, but just, yeah, you don't have to wait. You don't need to wait to get involved and start being, making a difference about the things that you're really passionate about.
exactly. As you said, you don't have to run for parliament. You can, talk about it, Lord, try and, create community groups about certain issues, especially in
Yeah.
my area, there's a lot of infrastructure issues and that sort of thing. And,
Yeah.
that's something I try and push, talking to local members of the community, trying to push those sort of issues with our local MPs and that sort of thing. So it's not really all
That's it.
about, running for parliament, but it's more about, trying to
Yeah.
push that change and don't sit there, complain and think that's going to get done by other people. Try and
Yeah.
push yourself out there and push for that change.
Yeah. And maybe you don't want to be the front of that, but you can help someone out who does want to be
Exactly.
the front of it. Maybe you want to be the data entry person or something like, but you need that. You need people who
You
are
want to be the
part
nerd
of
of
it.
the situation.
Yeah, totally. There's all sorts of different roles you can play in it. Maybe you're really good at graphic design and you make the posters or something, but it's, there are different roles you can play to create change. But yeah, just it you don't feel like you've got to wait to do it.
Exactly. So those are all our questions for you, Sarah. I do really appreciate you coming on the podcast for over an hour now. Your
Yeah.
kids are probably screaming for you to come back and collect it from school.
That's all right.
But yeah, I do really appreciate you coming on the podcast, talking a little bit about your career before politics, and some things that you would like to change in the Western Victorian region.
Amazing. Thank you. It's been great to be part of
Yeah.
it.